so we can do anything. We don't have to do introductions or anything. This is not a mulligan. Do you know this term? It's from golf. Yeah,
I
this
had to Google it.
this is a mulligan. It's not a mulligan. It's an elaboration. I'm excited. We're back with Matteo. Matteo, the best guest I've had in my whole show. He's the best. He's the king. He's very patient. I kept messing up our episode, and he kept coming back. And he was very patient with me during my episode with him. And as a friend of mine said, who listened to it, he's like, "You had a lot to say in that one, Sina." I was like, "Oh yes." I realized that like this is the problem of like using your podcast as therapy is that you just have these like cathartic explosions of of things I've wanted to say but haven't said. And because like, well, I don't put a gun to people's head, they don't have to listen to this, so they're here for something, they're here for some reason, so clearly they want to hear something. So here's something I've been holding back. Let me tell you about Gaddafi. Let me tell you about how I feel. So like, I don't know, I was doing something. I was not I realized that we needed to continue the conversation, and there's a lot to your book, and you warned us not to do this in your book, and I did it anyways. I made it about the main character. It was like a literary thing, I swear. That's how I defend it. I'm like obsessed with the anti-hero nature of Gaddafi himself, and also his like the strange legacy that his ghost plays for some people, like of like kind of people who a certain class of Western subjects who are kind of fascinated with him, who see him as a kind of part-time buffoon. But then there's also a class of people who really admire him and revere him and really say a lot of good things. So I realized that for my own reasons, I kind of like developed this opinion and I closed myself off. And there's a lot in your book that we're gonna pick up. So why did you? I asked you, let's read one chapter together. Why did you pick chapter 4?
Because I think is the one where most of the connections between the everyday lived experience of Libyans. But by the way, the title of the book is Everyday Politics in the Libyan Arab Jamāhīriyyah.
And the title of the chapter is Oil Consumerism and Capitalist Modernity.
It's best connected with the international sphere. I do the same job in the other ones, but I think in this one is so clear and is so material that is the reality that is being described, that in a way is the one I am most attached to. But the others as well, but I don't know. This one is somehow, it's because it's also shaped my current thinking. That's why. I think that's most of it.
So let's dive into it. So overall, it kind of, I mean, I think part of the reason why you chose this chapter, obviously, is does have like this is where the sort of different puzzle pieces, I guess you would say, of like the story of the Jamahiriya comes together, as you just said, so that the business, and this is where oil, the big question of oil, and like the sort of, it's a cliche, and I brought it up last episode too, but really it matters in this case, which is the oil curse or the resource curse, and the story of this like precious commodity that means so much to like the 20th, to like our modern life, and to like how economies run and how the business, how finances run. And there's a lot of it in Libya and what this sort of means for the project of the Jamahiriya. So let's get into it. How can I would think that it would be good to why don't you read it? Just read the opening chunk of it. This is like we can do this as like a seminar. This will be fun. I haven't done one of these in a long time.
Despite possessing 6% of the world's proven oil reserves and being the third largest producer in Africa after Angola and Nigeria, with one of the highest per capita income in the continent, many Libyans nonetheless believed that they had not benefited from oil and its revenues during the last decades of the Jamahiriya. They not only felt poor, but they also perceived their country as being underdeveloped compared with other resource-rich states in the Arab region, particularly the Persian Gulf. Their expectation of what the economy could provide and what the government should offer did not match their everyday reality. In order to explain this frustration, academic exponents of the paradox of the plenty theory have argued that Libya represented the perfect cautionary tale of the resource curse theory. the discovery of oil had encouraged the rejection of modern state structures as well as the creation of a private-led economy. After the 1969 revolution, an abundance of oil led to the rise of an authoritarian leader and rent-seeking elites who ended up controlling the population via a system of subsidies and co-optation, also called coercive distribution. Okay, I'm getting tired of this.
It's good though. No, but this is where the whole thing comes together, because you're giving a kind of grand narrative of the state, kind of, and the project itself.
All right, that is, the Jamāhīriyyah regime opted for buying its loyalty from the population, favoring specific tribes or region over others. I mean, what I kept saying later on is that basically what they've been seeing is that oil is a curse, oil does not produce democracy, makes certain states go cuckoo at the regional and international level because they want to do terrorist stuff and all this.
Yeah.
So what I say after...
It's because it's interesting. It's the framework because you're struggling. It seems to me that you're struggling with this, like very, and this is a part of the same problem we kept returning to even before our episode, which was you don't want to be spiking the football with the NATO people on this stuff. Like it's not, you don't. And so I feel like here is one of these moments where you say a lot of the things that say, you know, like diaspora activist on CNN would say, right? That like you assess the regime in its own, to use your term, like you assess it in a way that says like, okay, it looks like it could be the resource curse. Like it looks like, and the reason, but then jumping into the problem of the resource curse is the people who talk about the resource curse, and this is my own observation, I don't know if it's right or wrong, but that they're stupid fucking liberal imperialists. They think that it's like jihad versus McWorld, and their brains ossified in 1991 with the Berlin Wall stuff. Like, so it's like, I don't trust them. I don't want to talk about that stuff. So it's like, it's not that it's a, like, who's, because it's in a way you do get cursed, right? Because of resources, because there's this predatory international system of empire run by the great Satan that ensures that anyone with this precious commodity, and really with a lot of different precious commodities, will fall under their sway. So I feel like at least a lot of what gets discussed under the banner of the resource curse is this kind of fucking dopey Rand Corporation, you know, like think tanker normie, like, oh yeah, they don't have any elections. It's because of oil. Oil makes you addicted to something. And it's like, shut the fuck up, you like oligarchy, like denying.
That's right. That's right. That's no, it's spot on what you're saying. I mean, that's the exact problem that the ideological underpinning of this type of analysis is precisely that one. You know, we have democracy because we're cool and we wear ties. They don't have democracy.
We eat big burgers at McDonald's. Yeah, it's fucking losers. We were raised on this stuff. At least I was in my school. Like in my university, we read a ton of this stuff. And it was not read critically. It was read like... And then that's post 9/11 too, when I went to university. So like framed, especially against that, what was going on in the wider culture, it's crazy that people talk like this. But I guess this is also the field, I imagine. Like who runs these, like this is like IR theory people are like NATO imperialists mostly. At least that's the impression that I get.
I mean, that absolutely are. I mean, they're all funded by them. So, I mean, it's just the result of a political economy of knowledge production and everything. But I mean, you don't get to understand this from an undergraduate unless you come from a background or you're smart enough, or you know, you have it under your skin. But it took me time also to see that oil, yes, is a problem, but oil was also an empowering tool. But then it gets to a point where, you know, the government is trying to weaponize this oil and to say, you know, I want higher prices when I'm selling oil, and fuck you, I'm going to send you the revenues of this oil to the Palestinians to fight the Zionists. But why is that, you know, not possible? Well, that doesn't have anything to do with fucking oil, you know. So it's also what you want to do with oil. But there are also limitations to the oil itself, you know, as a But I mean, what do they call it? Also the commodity substance fetishism, I think, where everything is
I have to look this up. I've never heard this term. Commodity substance fetishism?
oil. Yeah, you want to explain everything through oil.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, well,
And-
that's what I want to avoid. I want to avoid that. There's like a big fucking huge thing of Orientalism underlying so much of this talk, because it's like, yeah, like, but part of it too is also like, yeah, okay, oil is this important resource, but like all like powerful countries have lots of resources. The U.S. has a lot more oil, has a ton of oil too, and it uses it. So it's like when they have it, it's a curse on them because of what it does to the government, supposedly, that it makes, because this is the theory, right? Is that it makes their governments sort of sclerotic, and they don't develop organic state structures because they have this fucking cash cow that they just go there and pluck like it's a shawarma.
Yeah, you know what I was thinking? Because you kept coming back with burgers. Why isn't the burger a fucking curse for the American working class? You could come up with a burger curse for the American worker. It's not gonna be a theory because, you know.
Yeah, that's true. It is it's a very I'm realizing now that it's one of those things that are so subtle and so widespread that it's this way of like, let me find this kind of issue that's important, but then decontextualize it and then frame the entire country of tens of millions of people around this one issue, and then blah, blah, blah. I mean, but here's the thing though, is that like now with that big long caveat, like, did the insane amount of oil per person in Libya, like, you say it is a double-edged sword, right?
Yes, absolutely, yes.
So like, while becoming a tool for pursuing radical political goals, its centrality to the world economy made its power vulnerable and volatile, as first the United States and later international sanctions demonstrated. Therefore, we might need to go beyond the oil curse frame to see how social imaginaries, desires, and hopes for the future intertwine with those national and supranational dynamics, including the role of oil and the rise of capitalist modernity worldwide. Once again, this will take us across the journey, blah, blah, blah. That's fine. Okay. So like this seems to be where a lot of the sort of like threads of your book kind of get pulled together, of like, yeah, like, because I mean, and this is such a corny thing to say, but it's like, it's true in the sense that like oil was the fuel of this revolution. Like if Libya didn't have its oil, like this doesn't, there is no green book. There's no, I mean, I don't know. You can't speak in those terms, but in the sense that like the key ingredient was this important resource.
Yeah. I mean, it's a materiality thing. I mean, there are always this. I was looking up through some archival documents from the 50s, and for example, you see the UN guys going to Libya and saying, "Oh, this is the perfect example of a country that has no future. There is nothing, basically."
The new country of Libya goes to the polls. This former Italian colony received independence 2 months ago. Posters announce the names of the candidates. The major choices facing the voter are the government's Independence Party and the pro-Muslim Congress Party. Inside the polling booths, voters, most of whom cannot read or write, tell a committee of local parties their choice and receive a ballot to place in a colored box. This casual system of voting turns the first election into a riot as the Congress Party accuses the government, which won by a 5-to-1 margin, of fixing the ballot. Police try to disperse the demonstrators. Missiles are hurled at the police, who in Libya's first major test of democracy reply with tear gas.
And then in 1961 or something, they find oil, and all of a sudden everything switches. This country is not as poor or as miserable as it used to be. So oil literally changes the material reality of Libya. By changing the material reality, you're going to change the cultural reality, the ideological, and the role of Libya in the international system, particularly when the international system is so dependent on oil. So it becomes this double-edged sword. It allowed Libya to gain a certain, I wouldn't call it centrality, but just to show up, like, usually Libya is that type of person, oh, there is a football game, you go in the goalie, you're shit, you're just playing the goalie. But the moment Libya gains oil, Libya is central to the international stage, and this group of revolutionaries can use oil to do things that were unimaginable a few years earlier. But in doing that, it's like you still need to sell oil to what you call to be your enemy. And that's where, you create this kind of, and then people say, this is a stupid argument, like Venezuela, for example, they are so anti-imperialist, but then they sell oil to the US. But the point is not that you don't want to engage with the US, you want to engage on an equal level. Is that possible? Probably not, because, probably, I don't know, but that's the whole point. You want to try to set the agenda, or a political agenda that is more favorable to you and is more and less dependent. But Libya comes to know this the hard way, because it's not just oil, it's the moment they cut you the technology to renovate and to build your own oil industry and infrastructure. So, you cannot generate a certain amount of revenue as you used to. And so that's where the sanctions come in this chapter, and they start showing us this. But it really, what I like about this chapter is also how it seeps really into things that they seem like so mundane. Like, when I was talking to people and they were like, oh, we never had ice cream, oh, we never had chocolate. And I'm thinking, okay, elaborate. And so everything goes back to the government. It's like, we couldn't have this, we didn't want to have that. But you have this mismatch of political agenda. The government wanted to use oil to pursue a certain international and regional agenda. Maybe up to a certain extent, up to the 80s, the people were supportive of that agenda. But by the 90s, they're like, why the fuck are we doing this? I'm tired. I want to have, I cannot access satellite. I want to have a nice car. And I'm sure you might be seeing this in Iran right now, where everything is it's just thrown at the government. But when you start, it's like an onion, you don't really get, I think we said that last time, you didn't really get to the end of it, but you just need to keep unpicking the different connected layers. And so oil, yes, it's really this ambivalent agent, but it really gave so much power to Libya. And I think the research curse is just stupid. It's literally stupid, because the US has oil. It's not a fucking curse for the US,
In his Tobruk palace, the august King Idris I signed the document in April 1955, thus activating the petroleum law, which at once marked a turning point in Libya's history, holding out the hope for a better economic status, a hope cherished by the king, his government, and his people. Within 2 years of the law's passage, the Libyan government had granted concessions covering most of Libya to the major international oil companies. Among them was American Overseas Petroleum Limited, or AMOSEAS for short, an affiliate of the Caltex group of companies. 8 concessions were obtained by AMOSEAS in widely separated parts of the country: in the west, in the south, and in the east. Before geological exploration could begin, and to support it later, office staffs had to be recruited and trained. At AMOSEAS headquarters in Tripoli, as well as in the field, Libyan citizens were employed to the fullest extent in all departments. Indeed, foreigners served only in a limited number of specialized technical supervisory positions for which trained Libyans were not yet available. Small parties of geologists did the initial pioneering, with general reconnaissances in all 3 provinces, in Tripolitania, in Cyrenaica, and in the Fezzan. They were looking for apparent structures and examining the rocks for oil potential. Long before there could be any assurance that oil would be found at all, and possibly even then not in deposits large enough for commercial development, tremendous sums of money had to be spent and risked by the foreign concession holders. Win, lose, or draw for the investors, the Libyan people were bound to benefit from fees and taxes, from the sale of goods and services, as well as in the direct employment of local personnel. The geologists continued their spade work. Living on the desert, they endured solitude, sandstorms, the chill of winter nights, and the merciless sun and broiling heat of summer. Before they could be sure of what lay beneath the surface, the oil companies had to spend and risk millions of dollars importing supplies and machinery and supporting large field parties. Specialized transportation equipment, geological exploration gear, and drilling rigs were brought in ships to Benghazi or Tripoli from Europe and North America.
Absolutely, you know, it's absolutely true what you're saying. I mean, he upgraded them at the international level, and they came to realize what it really meant to have oil. But in a way or another, it's also unsurprising the fact that precisely those states who possessed one of the key resource of the international system, they were then able to leverage it for different political agendas. I mean, we're seeing this with Russia right now. You know, it's unsurprising, you know, that, or with, you know, the moment you have this kind of resources, you are able to play. And definitely for Libya was a massive jump. But what you see, I mean, there are two levels here. One is the fact that when you read the mainstream analysis, is that everything that has been done with oil is defined by misguided economic policy and foreign policy adventurism. So basically, and it's because the ideological mindset is, oh, they didn't privatize, they didn't abide to the rule of the international order and all that. But at the same time, what you are watering down really is the fact that, again, you can't isolate Libya and what happened in 1969 onwards from the rest of the events happening during that time, the decolonization and the discussion around the new international economic order that were taking place. So this idea that we should be equal here at the table. You are not supposed to tell us, your major companies, oil companies, you can dictate the price and come to in our country, develop everything and give us nothing. I mean, think about that. Right before 1969, the British used to had managed to force the Libyan government to hire a British individual to control the financial plans of Libya. So, you know, there is a legacy here. There is also a weight of history that what they were trying to undo back then. On the personalized part of the project, that goes with time and we can talk about it. But at the beginning, I think they're trying to do something. If you just look at as you were saying, public supermarket. There is a sort of state-led capitalism, public supermarket. There is the construction of public tenements. People are offered a place to live, land redistribution. They are really trying. Exactly. There is so much being undertaken. And but this is the beauty.
The great man-made river.
That's true. That's, but there are also, adventures, military adventures that initially seem to go in a very positive light, like the support of an anti-French Chadian group in Chad, that they are trying to fight the French. But that war, for example, dragged so much from 1973 up to the 1987 that became literally a quagmire, if not a deathbed for Libya and the government. So, money was used in multiple ways, and there needs to be a much more, and I hope that I try to do that, a much more critical discussion of how it was used, of the limits also of oil, but not the intrinsic limits of oil as a substance. It's oil in the system of world capitalism. And you see this in developing also in the trajectory up to the 1980. Libya is able to do with oil sort of whatever they want. And that's why they become such a threat to the CIA, to the US State Department and all that. But the moment the US arranges an agreement with Saudi Arabia in breaking OPEC and flooding the market with cheap oil by the 80s,
they cut the ground from underneath you. Yeah, they take. Yeah, it's the argument of your chapters. The double-edged sword nature of it is like, yeah, you want a lot of money, but you have a lot of other rivals on the same market who will easily sort of like flood you out. And look, I mean, in Iran in the 80s, they actually bombed tankers. Like the U.S. is so intensely like covetous of its position in the global oil market that it has to be the man in charge, that anybody who squanders this precious resource in pursuance of their own, God forbid, sovereignty, that it punishes them. And in part of that punishment of the Iran was the so-called tanker wars, bombing oil tankers. I mean, to this day, they're still taking them hostage. I mean, it's interesting now that there's an Iranian tanker that's being held hostage that was basically commandeered and taken over to Houston, and the companies are afraid to unload it. It was reported yesterday. They're afraid to unload it because they know that Iran will retaliate against any company involved in that, because Iran controls the Persian Gulf, and that's like the story of it's like and I wondered here too, is that could it be that could it be that the sort of commodity fetishism of geopolitical power was part of like the trap itself, is that he thought he could spend his way into being this like regional power because of the nature of the Libyan oil wealth, and he could, and for what it seemed, at least in the context of Chad, but like overall, what I'm trying to say is that because of how small, and I know I return to this, but like because of how small Libya is and the nature of its geography, was it punching above its weight? That like it didn't need to become the what could have been for the Jamahiriya had he just done like Dubai. Like just done a Dubai. He could have just done a socialist Dubai. Like they could have had every single amenity in the whole world instantly with that resource. I don't know if that's true. I'm going on a limb saying that. Like I'm making a lot of historical, but like I mean in the sense that the way that they switched a button on in the Persian Gulf countries that they invented in the fucking 80s and 70s and 50s and stuff, and like invented these wholesale countries, that like that this too could have happened in the case study of Libya, but maybe not. Maybe it's a different era too, and maybe because it wasn't done under the supervision of British. I mean, it was in some ways, and I guess that question that you brought up earlier made me think in some ways is that like is part of the story here is that like the kind of something that I've noticed, like a sort of that we have this thing called decolonization, this era of decolonization, but like we know that like for huge chunks of Africa, like there's no decolonization, it's neocolonialism now. So we know that like this sort of the administrative legacies, as you put it, but really we're talking about these are relationships of control, which of course were then part of the task of the Jamahiriya was to overthrow this stuff. So like could this be why people are so lured into the resource trap? Because in the case of oil, that it's like it provides you with a lot, but as you sort of clear, is that it makes you sensitive to that. I mean, that's the story of Iran too. I mean, the interesting case study, the sort of comparison to be drawn here, I can't help but do it. I'm sorry, everyone. I'm sure you're tired of me being like a chauvinist Persian, but I can't help it because the goal of siege warfare, which is what we call sanctions, right, is to break you of your spirit by denying you things. It's like, oh, you want to have dishwashers? Sorry, bro, you can't get those parts. You wanna get this stuff. But here's an interesting story. The story of Iran and sanctions and Iran and that kind of siege warfare is that part of the response was to create its own native economies, right? Slag them as you will, right? Like the people and lots of Iranian diaspora people like make fun of them, and people in Iran too, I'm sure. But like ultimately, there was a kind of backbone that was a kind of economic backbone. And here's the other interesting thing now with the fact that China is the world's factory and its forge too, is that you don't need the permission of the West to modernize your country the way you did in the 70s and 80s and 90s, so to speak. So to a point. It could be too that they were a little out of time for this project?
I
Anachronistic.
I mean, I like the way you raise some doubts, then you re-answer to yourself, and then again you went back and forth. I think
it's a wild ride listening to this podcast. I'm sorry, everyone. I talk as I think. No, wait, I think as I talk.
it makes sense, I mean, you're right. Let's take the oil industry. The fact that the oil industry was built completely by the Americans and the British, mostly by the Americans in Libya. And the moment the Americans put the unilateral sanctions by the 1970s, also not allowing Libyan students to study engineering in the US. So it wasn't just about spare parts. It was really on all level a cultural warfare, and material one. So you can't just replace it. By that time, America had a monopoly on this kind of spare parts. Same thing on the aviation industry. America with 3K, by the way, controlled everything by that time. So you can't just replace spare parts in whichever you want. I mean, fast forward now, and you can do that, or just a few years later, and then it's in Europe's interest to have Libya keep producing oil. So the Europeans are the ones starting providing them with spare parts. And so you see always this debate about sanctions. The sanctions on Libya, they were not as devastating as they were on Iran. But still, you are delegitimizing a project abroad. And so the people inside, they start feeling, oh, fuck, look how they are looking at us internationally. They're not going to be all steadfast and like, oh, let's resist. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. So, it was a war. It was literally a war. I'm sure, Chad, I think it was definitely it was a debacle, a military debacle in Chad. I mean, when was the moment that maybe Libya should have pulled out? It's difficult. I mean, you need to be a political strategist. You needed to sit there because
they didn't have the experience to do this stuff.
I think in the first 5 years it went fine. They thought they had the support, but then you are facing Saudi Arabia, Israel, France.
Yeah, you can't compete with that like on their own terms. I mean, I don't know. I guess it just feels like this is where the money thing comes in. That like you can't I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know enough about this history to really say anything. I'm not going to say anything. But it seems to me that like it's a big project to take on this small country that is like just building itself up. And yeah, like was it too ambitious?
I think he was ambitious on that front. Yeah, Chad becomes very ambitious as a military adventure. But what you see is anyway. I mean, we have to give a balanced picture of what happened. And I think as much as we see that Chad was miserable in that front, we also see that. They were trying to provide. There was actually an improve of the life of people. Up to the 1980s, the Libyans were actually living in much better. This is where I say they try to push too much, but at the same time, when you see the historical trajectory from which Libya was coming from, you're also like, wow. We had concentration camp in 1940s. Now we had nothing in the 50s, something in the 60s, and all of a sudden we have everything for the most disadvantaged class. And then, maybe you're taking on too much, but yeah, it's definitely debatable. I agree with you. It's not a one straight.
Because part of the story here too is that like Libya wasn't like their geopolitical strategy wasn't part of any sort of broader international alliances or like this was a one-man show on the geopolitical stage in a sense. I'm sure there's probably like diplomatic stuff, obviously, that I'm overlooking here. But in the view that I get from it is that, it just like, it seems to me at least that like it was this isolated country trying to become powerful but not having the resources to do so just in that quick period of time and, sort of continue its own ascension. I guess I keep going back to this other question.
Yeah, you're right, because I think there was always a sort of anachronism in the fact that the revolution comes in, but Libya is very late in that moment, and Pan-Arabism is dying at the same time. So there is a lot of energy being spent on Pan-Arab projects. They all fail, but they really try hard with Syria, with Tunisia and everything. And then Iran comes in, and Libya was very supportive of the Iranian revolution, from the very start. There was always... Yeah, definitely nothing like the axis of resistance that we're talking now, where probably it's much clearer. But again, it's historical time. It's too easy to
I'm being chauvinist Iranian. I apologize. But I just mean in the sense that, like, you're trying to come up with reasons why the mismatch between political intentions and political results. And the intention seems to be that, we're going to sort of bust out. We're going to flex. We're going to flex and we're going to do anti-imperialist things. Now, is that a bad thing? Like, ethically, I mean, I've never led a country or a revolution before. What the fuck do I know? But like, in my assessment, it seems that like there was a lot more to do inside of Libya to strengthen the state and the military and just like, I don't know. I mean, that's an easy thing to say now. I'm trying not to do the thing of, I know how the movie ends, so I'm reading backwards, because that's a real problem here. Like, because we are like, this whole discussion is like is a eulogy. It's something that's dead.
Yes, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Like, it's like, how do you assess it from like, that the government doesn't exist anymore? That's past tense. Like, that's, like that position doesn't exist. Like, the sovereignty question of Libya is so far away right now that that it seems to be that like for a country that's like just again, I keep returning to this fucking thing, is it literally could not have ended worse for the revolution, like in terms of like historical trajectory.
I mean, the mismatch is also, and I think the chapter traces it very well, at least to my eyes, in the ways I try to explain this. Sorry for the self-praising here.
No, it's good. I actually want to read a chapter. I want to read something when you're done. But yeah, keep going.
It's this moment where you're trying to do something which is progressive, and it's really it tries to cater to the most disadvantaged classes within Libya, and also regionally you're trying to chip in, to produce, to support whatever you want, a little bit, sometimes not clearly, but you're trying to provide money, logistical support, military fund, whatever, to anti-colonial movement, independentists, whatever. Okay, the problem is on the face of attack, the military defeat translates immediately into an ideological defeat. Okay, and that's where you see the split of the elite. And
because you invested so much of your project in these like in these prestige accomplishments, and their failure said like, I guess we're not as powerful as we thought.
Yes. In fact, I think that is the moment, and that's what I would say. To me, that's where things go sort of wrong, if you want to say. It's in the 90s, and it's not. It's indicative of the fact also that the Soviet Union collapsed in the 90s. Again, I am of the opinion that you don't escape to the conditions of possibility of history. You don't have agency, basically, so that we get this agency word out of the way.
You're subject to the machinations of this like violent unfolding, and how you react to that violent unfolding is the test of your project, I guess, in a way. It's like, can you sustain yourself through economic warfare? Can you sustain it against international boycotts?
Yes.
Can you sustain it against, like Steven Spielberg putting in people and using your people as like a plot line? Like that's an all fronts war. Ideology and like political war in a country, and that's the test that over and over again, it seems, because the U.S. did it to North Korea, the U.S. does it to Iran, did it to Venezuela, does it to Cuba. These are Cuba. Like this is a standard operating procedure for the U.S. empires. You slander, you see, and you besiege, and you hex.
The Dubai thing comes in so clear, and that's
it was never allowed to be.
Yeah, it's like, but also, it's not just that. Also, why were your people dreaming about Dubai? If you were really an anti-imperialist front in that moment, why I can't numerically put, but why parts of the elites, including your own son, wanted to transform Libya into Dubai, and while you were trying to look at Africa, well, you know, there was a split. I mean, the split within the elites trickled down, to use some neoliberal language, so everybody feels safe, into to the masses. And that's you know, and I think that is clear when I started. I didn't even know when I started interviewing people that everybody was starting to come up, why was Libya not like Dubai? And I didn't understand. Then slowly, you know, like this whole stupid story about the sheikh that comes in the 70s, looks at Libya and says, oh, I want Dubai to be like Libya. And then they would say, oh, look at us right now. We are completely destroyed and they are at the center of the world. But it's just purely, this is literally cheap talk.